Good. We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the honourable member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. The Australian energy market operator is right now scrambling to avoid blackouts by cutting deals with factories to temporarily shut down. And the New South Wales Premier is urging residents, I quote, not to run your dishwasher, not to run your washing machine this afternoon. Prime Minister, is this what Labor's plan for, I quote, a renewable energy superpower really will look like?
Call to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. Order. Members on my, members on my left, the member for Herbert is now warned. No interjections while a question is being asked. It's déjà vu, and no interjections before even someone begins. Same day, same rules. The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question because it gives me an opportunity to update the House on the situation in New South Wales this afternoon. Now, as the House is aware, New South Wales is undergoing a lengthy and severe heatwave, which is, of course, increasing demand on the energy system.
Order.
It's a statement of fact. When there's a heatwave, energy demand goes up. In addition, Mr Speaker, in New South Wales, there are 5 units of coal and gas production that are not operating. Two of them were unexpected breakdowns in coal-fired power units, Mr Speaker. So, of course, that has added to pressures in New South Wales. So, Mr Speaker, it is the case that a lack of reserve notice has been issued. Now, this is not an unusual circumstance. This is AEMO doing its job, Mr Speaker. In fact, in the last quarter of the Morrison government, lack of reserve notices were issued 36 times. Who
was the minister?
And in the quarter before that, 55 times, Mr Speaker. Now, as a result of the lack of reserve notice that AEMO has issued, I'm advised that they have secured extra supplies as a result of the situation that is commonly put in place, which is known as RERT, which is to provide extra supplies, which means that AEMO has advised me that there are enough reserves for New South Wales this afternoon. Mr Speaker, of course, they are taking necessary precautions in case there is another outage, unexpected outage of a coal-fired unit, which is always a risk, Mr Speaker. AEMO has also advised me that batteries will play a very important role this afternoon in New South Wales because, as you would expect, Mr Speaker, during the day they are absorbing energy and they will be called upon this evening. So that is the advice of AEMO. So it would be disingenuous and dishonest to blame renewables, Mr Speaker, when you have 5 units out, 4 of them coal, 2 of them breakdowns, when you consider we have not had a day in the last 18 months where there hasn't been a breakdown in a coal-fired power unit across the national energy market. Now, the opposition chooses to say that they would sweat the assets and rely more on those coal-fired power stations. What we say is that we will continue to roll out renewables and batteries, Mr Speaker, to support this transition. It is the case, Mr Speaker, the honourable member referred to a blackout in south-west New South Wales which was resolved at 9 o'clock this morning, which was not load shedding, was not related to heat, was not related to energy generation, was because a transmission line was hit by a storm, Mr Speaker. The member for Fairfax, might want to get better information.
Order. Order. It was far too much. The Leader of the Opposition, just going to make sure everyone is adhering to the standing orders. There was just far too much noise during that answer. So we're just going to make sure today is a little different. I haven't been happy with the level of noise. It's the last week and we're just going to make sure we're all working together as hard as we can. The call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, what economic conditions did the government inherit, and in what ways In what ways is the Albanese Labor government bringing costs down and lifting wages for Australians?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lingari for her question. And of course, Australians do know that inflation is a global challenge, and the surge in energy prices and supply chain issues has affected people and economies worldwide. It's no secret that we inherited some tough circumstances: $1 trillion in debt, wages going backwards, wages going backwards, productivity flatlining, and inflation with a 6 in front of it and rising. But we have had a clear plan and we've stuck to it, bringing costs down, getting wages up and getting inflation back to where it should be. And today we've made even more progress. Monthly inflation remained at 2.1%, compared with the 6 it had in front of it when we took office. But we're also bringing costs down. Today we are introducing a bill to ensure that supermarkets face multi-million-dollar penalties for harmful breaches of the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct, fines of up to $10 million for price gouging. These are serious penalties, the highest corporate penalties under any industry code, because people trying hard to find good prices don't deserve to be ripped off. Shoppers deserve fair prices, not dodgy discounts. And day to day, unfair prices do make life hard. Over the course of the year, they really add up. So that's why we're cracking down on supermarkets and making sure that the regulators have the teeth that they need to make sure that supermarkets are doing the right thing. But we're also concerned with getting wages up. And last night, through the Senate, we passed a 15% pay increase for early childhood workers. 15%. And importantly, it's tied to keeping fees down for families.
Order. No. The Treasurer and the member for Hume can easily take their conversation outside, and I can assist with that if they really want. So just when there are answers, just restrain yourselves, because I want to hear what the Prime Minister is saying. He has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the truth is that they really lose it when you speak about paying workers properly. Exactly. Whether it's aged care workers or whether it's early educators, whether it's people on the minimum wage, whenever you speak about rising wages, and we've had real wages increase for 4 quarters in a row, they start yelling and shouting, Mr Speaker, because they don't like it. Because we know that early educators shape lives and change lives. We need to do more than just thank them. We need to make sure they're properly valued and fairly paid. This is a win for workers, a win for families and a win for our littlest Australians as well. This government is turning promises into progress.
Call to the honourable member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. After 2.5 years of this bad Albanese Labor government, working families have seen their cost of living increase by 18.9%. Food is up 11.8%, housing 11.7%, gas is up 32.2%. This Prime Minister is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australians possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked to compare and contrast how Australia has performed over the last 2.5 years with what would have happened had we not taken action. That's right. Now, the shadow treasurer had inflation with a 6 in front of it when they were elected. A 6 in front of it. Now it has a 2 in front of it.
Yep. Order. The member for Deakin, like any other member, is entitled to raise a point of order. No matter where you sit, anyone's entitled to raise a point of order, and he's going to be given that opportunity now.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The Prime Minister has made a habit of recharacterising every question entirely differently to the question asked, and he should be pulled up for relevance.
That isn't a point of order. That's a comment by the member for Deakin. The question, order. As I said to the Leader of the Opposition and I've said to others during the week, we're simply not going to get up and people just to say how they feel or what they like to say during question time. There are rules to follow and there are standing orders to follow. So if you're entitled to take a point of order, and I gave you that courtesy, but you didn't show the same respect to the chamber by simply getting up and saying you didn't like how the Prime Minister was answering the question or whatever he was doing. So you're going to leave the chamber under 94A. No, we are not going to have that. If people want to make points of order, they will always be given that opportunity to do so. They will be given that out of respect. I ask the same respect to be shown by following the standing orders. Now, if the Prime Minister is going to be asked a broad question and about the last 2.5 years and all sorts of things, well, he's going to be pretty broad in his answer. The member for Hume. Yeah. So we're going to make the Treasurer is going to be warned now. I just am not having this today. We're not going to have this back and forth across the chamber. There's people freewheeling. Okay? So we're going to listen to the Prime Minister. I'm going to make sure he's being directly relevant to the topics he was asked about. He can't go around the world, but I'm going to make sure he's being directly relevant.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'll go directly to cost of living and what we have done and what the alternative would have been. Had we not acted, 84% of taxpayers would be worse off. If you compare what we put in place with what they supported. 2.9 million taxpayers would have not got 1 cent if they had had their way. Australians who rely upon PBS medicines would be $1 billion worse off because they said no to cheaper medicines. Families would have missed out on over 900,000 free doctor's appointments. I'm sorry for mentioning that word free because we know what their approach is there. Because they said no to Medicare urgent care clinics. Not to mention 5.4 million extra bulk billed appointments thanks to our tripling of the bulk billing incentive. 2.6 million award wage workers would be worse off because they said no to minimum wage increases that we supported. Millions of households will be $800 worse off because they said no to energy rebates, as would every small business who got those energy rebates as well. Some 1 million of them would be $650 worse off. Over 1 million families would be worse off on childcare fees because they said no to cheaper childcare. And 3 million Australians would have worse HECS debts because they said no to HECS relief and have been opposed to it just this week. 500,000 Australians would have missed out on free TAFE. So not just had to pay if they enrolled in free TAFE, but would have missed out on the opportunity of betterment for themselves and their families. And thousands of workers, including Nicole, who I met, would be $34,000, one worker worse off, if we didn't have same job, same pay, because they said no to that. Mr Speaker, these have been difficult times, and we understand that people are doing it tough. The difference between the government and the opposition is that we've taken measures to assist people. Those opposite have just said nope, nope to everything.
The call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government helping relieve cost of living pressures for early childhood education workers and families, and are there any other approaches?
The call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson not just for his question, but because the member for Robertson understands that early childhood workers provide an essential service. And that's exactly why early childhood education is an important priority for the Albanese Labor government. And, Mr Speaker, I'm delighted to update the House that the Albanese government's wage justice bill has now passed the Senate, delivering an historic 15% wage increase for early childhood workers right across Australia. Now, that's good news. But there's more good news, because in 2022, when we introduced our changes to the childcare subsidy, making early childhood education more affordable for over 1 million Australian families, recent ABS figures confirm for us now that those reforms reduced out-of-pocket expenses for families even more than what we originally thought. The corrected data shows that after the introduction of our reforms in 2022, families' out-of-pocket expenses fell by 17.2%. 17.2%. And, Mr Speaker, average out-of-pocket costs in the June quarter to 2024 remain lower than when the childcare subsidy was first introduced in 2018. Making early childhood education and care more affordable was just a first step towards our vision of universal early childhood education and care. But we know that there is more to do. We know there's more to do. And we know that a strong and sustainable workforce is fundamental to that work. Today, there are around 30,000 more workers in early childhood education than when we first came into office. And that's in no small measure due to the deliberate actions of this government in creating a pipeline of workers through fee-free TAFE, in supporting professional development and paid practicums, and in our historic wage increase, 15% for the sector. Now, combined with our tax cuts, this wage increase ensures that early childhood workers are not just earning more, but they're also keeping more of what they earn. But I'm asked about alternative approaches, and the Leader of the Opposition continues to dismiss this important wage increase as a one-off sugar hit. Now, make no mistake, Mr Speaker, the essential services provided by early childhood educators and workers will be at risk. They'd be at risk under those opposite, because they don't value early childhood education and care, and they don't support higher wages. Now, this government is bringing down the cost of early childhood education and care when we're raising wages in the sector. That's how you deliver real meaningful cost of living relief to workers and to families. And that's what Labor governments do, and that's what this Leader of the Opposition won't do.
Before I call the member for Kennedy, I'll just welcome some people to the chamber and then I'll give him the call. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are recipients of the Australian Olympic Committee Changemaker Medals for 2024. They are students from across Australia who embody the Olympic spirit by demonstrating outstanding leadership in making, through the power of sport, positive impacts in their schools and communities. We also have participants in the Department of Foreign Affairs graduate program, and also I'd like to acknowledge Mr Ian Stewart OAM, APM and David Daniels OAM, who are here today with representatives from Crime Stoppers from across Australia. And I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Year 12 winner from this year's My First Speech competition, Olivia Rose Bradshaw from the electorate of Casey. Olivia couldn't make it to the House with the other winners as she was sitting exams, so we're delighted to finally have you with us today. Well done, Olivia. I give the call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Treasurer, I made 100 in the backyard at Mum's. Tree houses, tyre swings, flashing footballs. Does the Australian dream still exist, or does the reality of crippling debt traumatise young couples? Your last three budgets acknowledge that regulatory burdens have driven house prices beyond affordability. Treasurer, why don't you become a federal government, cut the Gordonian knot and wreak can-I-like destruction upon power-drunk state and local government regulators?
Order. There was a lot in that question, and I'm looking forward to the answer. The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It does have a certain appeal, the member for Kennedy. I appreciate the question about young people in particular, and I take the opportunity to welcome, as the Speaker did, Olivia. We're pleased you could make it in the end. We hope your exams went well. We assume if you won that competition, you probably nailed the exams as well. Now, when it comes to young people and to the beautifully nostalgic Queensland childhood that the member for Kennedy describes in his question, which is a little bit familiar to me from a couple of generations later, I wanted to say
Order. I'm hoping for a Christmas miracle. The member for Kennedy.
Mr. Speaker, I asked a question about affordability, and we had to talk to someone in the gallery,
Okay.
and then a reference to his childhood.
The member may resume his seat. All right. Okay. The point was on relevance. I thank the member. And the Treasurer was just referring to the question he was asked about. So you did mention that. So we'll give him another go. He's got the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member for the question. The reason I make that Queensland reference is because I wanted to begin by acknowledging, in a very Queensland way, that in our economy too often younger people and younger families get the rough end of the pineapple when it comes to the way that some of our policies are set up.
Order.
And that's really the motivation behind so much of what we're doing, whether it's the way that we rewrote the tax cuts, whether it's our Help to Buy scheme that passed the House today, whether it's all the other things we're doing in housing, whether it's our efforts to get wages moving again and strengthen Medicare, all of that, in one way or another, is in recognition and in response to the fact that we do think that young people have had a rough deal for too long. It's also the motivating force behind the changes we're making to student debt. So to acknowledge in the member for Kennedy's question something I agree with, which is that we can always do more to make sure that younger people get a fairer go in our economy and in our society, and housing is a big part of that. Housing affordability is a big part of that. Now, he asked me about the role of the states and the role of the Commonwealth. We have acknowledged, more than acknowledged, we have taken responsibility for a huge investment, a huge amount of Commonwealth investment in housing. I pay tribute to the Housing Minister and her predecessor for that, $32 billion. And that's because we know if we're going to build the homes that we need to make our economy fairer for young people, then we need everyone to do their bit, and we are doing our bit. The member for Kennedy asks me about the role of the states. There is a substantial role for the states here, whether it's in regulation or investment or in other ways, and I'll be convening the state treasurers on Friday here in Canberra to talk about some of these issues that he raises in his question. But if his question is there a role for the Commonwealth? Yes, we embrace that enthusiastically. If his question is there a role for states and state regulators? Of course there is. And if we are to build the homes we need for the young people to deliver that sense of intergenerational justice that he asked me about, everybody needs to do their bit. We're doing our bit. The states need to do their bit as well.
Call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Education. How is the Albanese Labor government helping students and easing cost of living pressures for early educators?
Call to the Minister for Education.
I can do better than that. Mr Speaker, can I thank my friend, the greatest member for Gilmore that we've ever had. Mr Speaker, last night we delivered an education trifecta. A 15% pay rise for our early educators, increased funding for public schools, and $3 billion in student debt wiped for more than 3 million Australians. And that 15% pay rise for early educators will start to roll out from this weekend. The extra funding for our public schools will start to roll out in just over a month. And the $3 billion we've wiped from student debt will be done by the ATO over the next few weeks. Mr Speaker, our early educators are some of the most underpaid workers in this country. They don't just change nappies, they change lives. And this pay rise will help to change their lives. This is what it will mean. An extra $100 in their pocket from next week, an extra $5,000 over the next year. And we hope it will encourage more people to want to be an early educator. And here's a good sign, good start. The biggest childcare provider in the country have told us that in the week after they signed up for this pay agreement, they've seen an 8% increase in the number of job applications. So that's a good start. Mr Speaker, the extra funding for public schools will also change lives. It'll help us to turn around that decline in the number of people finishing school by tying this funding to real and practical reforms like phonics checks and numeracy checks, evidence-based teaching and catch-up tutoring. And wiping $3 billion of HECS debt will change lives too. And it's just the start. If we win the next election, we will cut student debt by a further 20%. And to give you an idea what that means, the change that we made last night will wipe about $1,200 off the average HECS debt. And if we win the next election, we'll wipe a further $5,500 off the average HECS debt. That'll make a world of difference for a lot of young people just out of uni, just out of TAFE, just out of home, just getting started. Mr Speaker, this is what only Labor governments do.
That's right.
Cut your debt, lift your wages, fund our schools properly, open the door of opportunity, help more young Australians to finish school and then go to TAFE or to university, build a better and a fairer education system where no one's held back and no one's left behind.
Yeah. Call to the honourable member for Hume.
Prime Minister, under the Albanese Labor government, Australians' living standards have collapsed by 8.7%. Wow. This is worse than the declines seen during the disastrous Whitlam government and the worst in the OECD. New analysis shows that Labor has no plan to restore Australians' standard of living. The Prime Minister is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australians possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. He's got a lot of nerve asking about incomes and living standards and inflation after the mess that they left us to clean up. And, Mr Speaker, if you look right across the board, inflation was higher and rising on their watch. Living standards were falling substantially already when we came to office. Real wages were falling substantially when we came to office. And now, having acknowledged that there is an issue with pressure on living standards, the choice for this parliament over the course of the last 2.5 years was to help people with that or to leave them hanging. And this side of the House has spent 2.5 years with cost of living relief as its #1 priority, and at every single turn those opposite have voted against that cost of living relief. And so how dare they come in here, Mr Speaker, and talk about living standards and wages and inflation when inflation was 3 times higher on their watch, and real wages fell for 5 consecutive quarters, and now they've grown for 4 consecutive quarters on our watch, when living standards were falling by 1.7% in the quarter of the election, 3 times faster than now, when living standards fell 14 quarters on their watch.
Treasurer will pause the order. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. There was no compare and contrast with the previous government under that, but you can compare and contrast with the Whitlam government if you like.
Order. Yeah. The Treasurer was the part of the question I'm most interested in was how can Australians afford another 3 years of Labor? Now, the Treasurer is disagreeing with that, and he's saying why that is not the case by looking at why he believes the figures that he's quoting. Okay, don't need to point to anyone. So, if you're asking a question about that, he's going to contest that, and he's going to give evidence as to why he thinks that's wrong. So, he is being directly relevant. He's not talking about alternative policies. He's talking about facts and numbers, and I'm listening to him carefully. But if you've got a broad question around the past and the government's record, he's going to defend it. Well, the Whitlam government, no matter what it is, he's going to defend what he's doing, and so he's being directly relevant. So that's the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not having those sorts of interjections. No. The member for Hume is entitled to raise his point of order.
Mr Speaker, as I understand it, I'm asked about living standards. Living standards are measured by real household disposable income. That was going backwards by 1.7% in the quarter of the election. And on that measure, living standards fell 14 quarters under those opposite, Mr Speaker. These are facts. And no amount of pre-cooked points of orders that somebody has to type out for him in order to make him look spontaneous is going to make up for the fact that living standards were falling when we came to office, real wages were falling when we came to office, and inflation was 3 times higher under them than under us, and it was rising fast on their watch, Mr Speaker. And so the point that I'm making, Mr Speaker, is acknowledging the pressure on people and the pressure on living standards. The choice for the parliament over and over again over the course of the last 2.5 years is whether to help people with their cost of living or to ensure that people go further backwards. And people would be much worse off were it not for the cost of living measures that we have budgeted for 3 times. And people would be much worse off under those opposite. We know that because they voted against the cost of living help. And we know that because we know their record of coming after wages and Medicare, coming after housing and all of the things which matter most when it comes to living standards in our community. This side of the House acknowledges the pressures that people are under, acknowledges that when we came to office people were going backwards. That's why we're getting inflation down, it's why we're getting wages up, strengthening Medicare and investing in housing despite the opposition of those opposite.
The call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What progress has the Albanese Labor government made in the fight against inflation and to ease cost of living pressures? What obstacles are standing in the way?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, the terrific member for Boothby, for her very important question, because it goes to the very substantial progress which is made clear by the new monthly inflation figures which were released a couple of hours ago, Mr Speaker. And what those new numbers confirmed was that we have made very substantial, very welcome, very encouraging progress in this fight against inflation. And the fight against inflation has been this government's #1 priority, easing the cost of living where we can do that in the most responsible way, making sure that we're helping people with their energy bills, cutting taxes, cheaper medicines, cheaper early childhood education, getting wages moving again, all of the ways that we're helping with the cost of living. And the new inflation numbers today show that inflation for the month was 2.1%. 2.1%. Remembering it was 6.1% under those opposite. So monthly inflation is now a third of the 6.1% we inherited. I know that the Shadow Treasurer thinks 2.1 last month and 2.1 this month means that it's gone up, but that doesn't mean that. You've got to fact check everything. You've got to fact check everything that the Shadow Treasurer says, Mr Speaker. Somebody will explain this to you later. Somebody will explain this to you later. And what else it showed today in the inflation data is that our policies are helping when it comes to household budgets. One of the reasons why there was actually a monthly fall in rent was because of our Commonwealth rent assistance, which we've talked about. One of the reasons why electricity prices fell 35.6% in the year to October was because of our energy rebates. And so you can see that our policies are making a meaningful difference to the fight against inflation, taking some of this pressure off, even at the same time as we recognise that people are still under pretty substantial pressure. Now, Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister said a moment ago, our efforts on supermarkets are part of this as well, the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct, all about making sure we get a fair go for farmers and families. And what this shows is whether our cost of living relief or our approach to supermarkets, we are coming at these cost of living pressures from every responsible angle that we can. Now, we know from today's numbers that if those opposite were in power, inflation would be higher and people would be getting less help. We know that from the figures released by the ABS today. We know that Australians are doing it tough. We also know that Australians would be worse off were it not for our efforts to provide cost of living help. And we also know from these numbers that Australians would be worse off under the coalition. We know that because they voted against the cost of living help. We know that because we know their record on Medicare and wages and housing and in all of these important ways. This side of the House is getting inflation down and wages up. We're strengthening Medicare and building more homes. Today's data shows that we're making important progress.
The call to the member for Durack.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Under the Albanese Labor government, Australia's living standards have fallen off a cliff. New analysis shows that Australian households will continue to feel the pain of 12 rate rises under Labor for many more years to come, with no relief in sight. The Prime Minister is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australians possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Durack for her question, and indeed the member for Durack represents a vast electorate, and it's been my pleasure to be there recently in Geraldton, talking to the lobster farmers at the co-op there, who, because of what we have done on trade and jobs, have a future.
Order.
As a result of the direct work that we have done, including with the Foreign Minister and the Trade Minister. Now, the member for Durack asked me about what has happened in the last 2.5 years with regard to living standards, and that therefore invites an opportunity for me to talk about the facts. And the fact is, when we came to office, inflation was having a 6 in front of it and was rising. Today's figures show, the monthly figures, it's 2.1 and falling, and falling. The fact is that the member for Durack was part of, sometimes as a minister, of spending 9 years in government creating the problems, but they've spent every day in opposition stopping the solutions or trying to stop the solutions. Their cuts, their waste, their neglect left Australia wide open to global uncertainty, and now they want to go further. They want to cut what is helping and punish people who are struggling, to claw back the tax cuts that we've delivered, to close the Medicare urgent care clinics that we've opened, to stop the housing projects that we've started, to take away the help with power bills that today's figures show have made a difference that households deserve, to push up the price of medicines that people need, to rip away the pay rises that we have delivered through same job, same pay, through the work with early childhood educators, with aged care workers, people on the minimum wage, rip all that away, and to derail the progress that we've made on renewables so they can burn hundreds of billions of dollars on some plan into the 2040s to deliver something that will be less than 4% of the energy that Australia needs. So they come in here, all they do is stand in the way and take things away. They only have 2 settings, Mr Speaker, no and no way. That is the only settings that they have. Well, we on this side of the House showed today with Help to Buy we're about construction. They showed once again they're about obstruction. That's the difference between the 2 sides of this chamber. We're building Australia's future. They're blocking the Australian dream. They not only don't support public housing, they don't support people into home ownership either. They certainly don't support rental assistance. They have no way forward for Australia, just more reckless negativity and inaction and trying to block the progress that Australia needs.
Give a call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government making the online environment safer for all Australians?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. The Albanese government takes seriously its commitment to keeping all Australians safe online. We know that parents are concerned about the harms to children, and we have taken a decision to support them. This House has passed our world-leading legislation for an age limit for access to social media, and I thank the members from all sides who joined the government in supporting this vital bill. As I said yesterday, the government is committed to working with young people and other key stakeholders as we implement this legislation. I also thank the members who've shown an interest in this bill. Some of their statements and proposed amendments pointed to the need for a legislated digital duty of care. And earlier this month, I announced that the Albanese government will do precisely that. The duty of care will deliver a more systemic and preventative approach to making online services safer. It has wide support, including from the International Justice Mission, Reach Out, the Black Dog Institute, Beyond Blue, the Butterfly Foundation and many others. It was an important recommendation from the Online Safety Act review and the report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Media and Australian Society. The duty of care will complement the ongoing work across government to help keep all Australians safe online. This includes the Assistant Treasurer, who is delivering important reforms to tackle the financial and economic harms faced by too many Australians as a result of scams. The Attorney-General is leading work to safeguard the privacy of Australians and has legislated to criminalise the non-consensual sharing of sexually explicit deepfakes. And as we marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, I acknowledge the work being delivered to help keep women and children safe online. This includes the Minister for Social Services, who has worked with me to deliver a world-leading dating app code to tackle tech-facilitated abuse that particularly targets women. The eSafety Commissioner recently launched more grants to develop innovative projects to address the root causes of tech-facilitated abuse. And the Albanese government has funded the Alana and Madeline Foundation to make practical resources and learning tools available to all schools across Australia for free to better equip young people to navigate online environments. Mr Speaker, we know that keeping Australians safe online requires decisive action, and the Albanese government is delivering exactly that.
Give the call to Member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Professor Andrew Whittaker told the Nuclear Energy Select Committee, quote, "I firmly believe that nuclear power should be part of the energy mix in Australia. Energy security is national security. Being part of a global nuclear supply chain would benefit all Australians. Why is Labor dismissing world experts in pursuit of a renewables-only policy that is putting our nation's energy security at risk?"
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question, and I thank him for raising the evidence that's been provided to the committee that's being chaired by the member for Hunter. Because now that the member for Flynn has opened that question, it gives me an opportunity to talk about the evidence that the member for Hunter and his colleagues have been hearing, Mr Speaker. Like the evidence from Ontario, which the Shadow Minister has referred to, which is their poster child for nuclear, as the province where they say that's the best practice for nuclear. And we've heard evidence from the professor from the University of Ontario, who has pointed out that that policy has bankrupted the Hydro Company of Ontario and seen their prices skyrocket compared to the provinces next door. That, for example, people in Ontario pay more for energy than the people of Quebec next door, when Quebec relies a lot more on renewable hydro, Mr Speaker. That is the evidence that the committee chaired by the member for Hunter has heard, Mr Speaker. The member for Fairfax knows it because he sits on that committee. He sits on that committee, Mr Speaker, so he's heard all the evidence. He's also heard the evidence from Professor Bill Grace from the University of Western Australia, who's pointed out that the only way to make nuclear power work in Australia is to switch off cheap renewable energy, to stop exporting electricity from your rooftop solar system, forget feed-in tariffs. The system has to call on baseload nuclear power first, or the plan makes no sense whatsoever. So, Mr Speaker, what Professor Grace is pointing out is that all those Australians who've invested in solar, rooftop solar, will have their feed-in tariffs cut and they will be curtailed to make way for nuclear power, Mr Speaker. That's the evidence that's been heard before the committee. We've also heard from Sunshine Hydro that the AP1000 nuclear reactors, which is the preferred model of the member for Fairfax, even if it's running at 15%, will turn off 75,000 solar rooftops across Australia, Mr Speaker. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, I was present at the installation of Australia's 4 millionth solar installation, rooftop solar, 4 millionth installation. These are Australians who've invested in rooftop solar. The member for Hinkler has pointed out, and Senator Canavan have pointed out, that they support curtailing solar. They support rooftop solar being turned off to make room for nuclear energy. So if we're going to have a discussion about the evidence that's been heard by this committee, we're up for that discussion, and I'm up to debate the member for Fairfax Q&A suggested a debate. He said no. 7:30 report has suggested a debate. I've said yes. I await the answer of the member for Fairfax.
Nice try. Order. Tempting. No, everyone's just going to settle and the chamber will come to order so I can hear from the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. What do the Albanese Labor government's reforms of the NDIS mean for participants and their families? Are there any other approaches? Thank you.
To the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Pearce for her question. Since the Albanese government got elected, I'm pleased to inform Australians that the NDIS is getting back on track. In essence, people with disability have been put back at the centre of the scheme, and the financial numbers are actually improving whilst maintaining the integrity of the scheme, and also a consensus on the best way forward to keep the scheme on track has emerged, other than the Greens political party and some senators. To demonstrate the metrics how in the last 30 months this scheme is getting back on track. Before we got elected, the scheme was growing in investment outlay by 23%. Last financial year 18%. This year we're on track for 12%, following year 8%. Participant growth before we got elected, 15%. Now it's at 8%, and many categories have now stabilised. When we got elected, the NDIS was in danger of being the only lifeboat in the ocean. The states were contributing 25% of the cost of the scheme, us 75%. We've been able to persuade the states to lift their contribution each year from an extra 4% growth to 8% growth, and most pleasingly the states have agreed with the Commonwealth to start rolling out in a year's time foundational support services, so the scheme is not the only lifeboat in the ocean. When we came to office, there was rampant fraud. There are now 500 investigations being conducted or underway, 50 people in front of the courts. Billions of dollars of payments are now being investigated for their integrity. And I'm pleased to announce today that we'll be spending an extra $110 million, the Albanese government, to crack down on fraud. There was no clarity on what money could be used for when we got elected. We've now clarified what that can be used for. When we got elected, over 90% of the service providers were simply unregistered. We've now got a plan to move forward to register the vast bulk of service providers. When we got elected, people could come into the scheme by all sorts of different assessments. We're going to bring the assessment in-house so that there's some consistency and transparency. Before we got elected, you could spend 160 days being fit for discharge on the NDIS in hospital before you got out of hospital. Now it's down on average to 22 days. External legal costs have fallen. The wages that are paid to disability support workers have increased. We recognise there is still more to do. We've still got to keep working with the states on these foundational supports, led by my colleague Amanda Rishworth. We recognise that there's still integrity issues in the scheme. We recognise that decision-making is still inconsistent in parts. But to finish where I started, the reality is that this nation made a promise to ageing carers up at midnight. Will there be someone to look after their adult child when they no longer can? The good news is that because of the Albanese government and the reform in this term, we are closer to keeping that promise than we've ever been before.
Give the call to the member for Ryan.
Speaker. Question to the Prime Minister. The Senate inquiry report on aircraft noise is released today. At the hearings we heard from communities nationwide how aircraft noise is wrecking their sleep, health and well-being. A curfew could help. So why does Sydney have a curfew but residents in Brisbane are left to suffer?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and I recognise the member's question in the spirit in which it's asked. We, of course, do understand that community concerns in relation to the noise impact of aircraft movements on residents in the vicinity of airports, and particularly in Sydney Airport and Brisbane and across the country, and it's an issue we do take seriously. The new runway at Brisbane Airport opened in 2020, following approval by the former coalition government, who did not undertake, frankly, sufficient community consultation in the process, particularly in relation to aircraft noise. At the last election, Labor committed to establish a community advisory board to hear directly from locals and support development of possible mitigations. Since coming to office, in addition to formally establishing the advisory board, we've implemented a number of measures to reduce the impact of noise, including changes to the timing of flights and flight paths to minimise impact on residential areas, and we continue to work on additional solutions. I've made very clear my expectations to air services that further measures be implemented to mitigate the impact of aircraft noise at Brisbane Airport. And in response to this and to community concerns, Air Services has implemented a noise action plan which is delivering real improvements at that airport. Air Services have limited the ability of some aircraft to take off over land and during the early morning in Brisbane so that propeller planes and turboprops do not operate from the new runway before 6 a.m. Air Services has also boosted the number of flights that take off and land over water, known as SOD props, during the night and early mornings on weekends. Each time SOD props is used, 290,000 to 500,000 fewer residents are directly overflown. We've increased the use of SOD props and plan to use that mode much more. Now, that is what this government has been doing. That is what this government has been doing. We've reinstated the previous flight path over the overwater departures. We've been working with communities in order to do that. But I'm asked particularly about the Greens' proposal of a curfew at Brisbane Airport. A curfew at Brisbane Airport. Let's compare what happens at Sydney Airport, where movements are capped at 80 movements per hour. It is the busiest airport in the country. What the Greens want is a cap at 46 movements per hour. In Sydney, what that has meant, the 80 movements per hour, we are now building a second airport because that airport is at capacity. If you are saying that Brisbane Airport is at capacity at 40, you are dreaming.
Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Wills.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government working to help renters and to help more Australians own their own home, and what obstacles stand in the way?
Good question. The call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thanks so much, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Wills, who is one of the parliament's most tireless advocates for housing. Speaker, I'm pleased to update the House. Our government's Help to Buy legislation has now received the support of both chambers of the parliament, and it will become law. And I want to acknowledge Minister Collins for the really important work she did to bring us to this point. Speaker, my first visit as Housing Minister was to the member for Wills electorate. And we sat with a group of low-income young people, and they spoke to us person to person about the sense of genuine despair many of them feel about their prospects for home ownership. Help to Buy is a law for them. Help to Buy is a law for Australia's childcare workers, aged care workers and disability workers, people who need and deserve the help of government, and now they're going to get it. Speaker, Help to Buy is a really important part of Labor's bold and ambitious $32 billion housing agenda. This law has received widespread support from around the housing sector and in the community, and indeed, Speaker, from across the parliament. And when the House voted just earlier on this really important reform, there was only one group that tried to stand in the way of childcare workers getting home ownership. It was the nasty, negative, reckless Liberals and Nationals. Now, Speaker, you're not going to believe this, but as recently as yesterday, the Coalition have promised that if they are given the chance, they will abolish Help to Buy and abolish that support that will deny tens of thousands of Australians their aspirations for home ownership.
Order.
And I say to those opposite, good luck convincing the Australian people that you are a party that supports home ownership when you've come into this parliament, voted against this measure and said that you'll abolish it if you're elected to government. Now, it is not too late, Speaker, for the Coalition to demonstrate concern for building housing supply, and this is the next measure that the parliament will soon consider. Labor's build-to-rent legislation is going to come before the Senate shortly. If it's passed, it is going to result in the building of tens of thousands of desperately needed additional rental homes for our country. It's another bill with really widespread support around the parliament. But, Speaker, what are the Coalition going to do? They cannot claim that they want more homes built in this country and then vote against this bill. Speaker, I want to give thanks to the many people in this parliament who have worked constructively with our government on housing policy, for choosing to support opportunities for people who desperately need the help of government to get into home ownership. This election, Australians are going to have a really, really clear choice on housing, between a reckless and arrogant party of pessimism and negativity in the opposition, or a party of progress that's stepping up on housing and helping Australians build, rent and buy. Thanks.
Call to the honourable member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that core inflation, the Reserve Bank's preferred measure of inflation, went up today?
Order. Order. Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The fact is that core inflation has come down since we were elected. That's right. That is the fact. That is the fact. That is the fact. Consistently, all the way through, and in the last quarterly figures that were given. That's right. And today, one of the things that it strikes me, Mr Speaker, is that they are never so unhappy and angry as when things are heading in a good direction for Australians. Their whole position is a wishing and a hoping for the very worst for Australia. No hope, just nope to everything that comes before this parliament.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Order. Okay.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. That question was very specific about what core inflation did today, confirming that it went up. Mr Speaker, is it your ruling that what he was saying, which was completely different from that, was relevant?
Well, the Prime Minister did mention core inflation, right? Yep. So he's going to make sure he's talking about the topic, which is core inflation, not other topics and not other alternatives. So I hear what you're saying. So we're just going to make sure the Prime Minister won't be able to go too far on this topic because it was a very tight question. So the Prime Minister has the call.
That's why I addressed up front the issue of core inflation and pointed out
Order.
that it was lower than what we inherited. The new numbers today show that monthly inflation is around a third of what we inherited at the election and around a quarter of its peak. Another encouraging sign that our policies are helping to get inflation down after it was higher and rising under the Liberals. Higher and rising. Indeed, the last quarter of the figures in which they held office in March 2022 was a figure of 2.1%.
Prime Minister will pause. Order. We don't need a running commentary. Order. The manager on a further point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, Standing Order 91C states that a member's conduct is disorderly if they wilfully refuse to conform to a standing order. You rightly directed the Prime Minister to come back to the subject of the question, to comply with the relevance requirement, and he's flouting your order, your direction.
I can appreciate the member would like a yes-no answer and he would like a direct response to the— No, I'm trying to work with the member for Hume here, so work with me. So the way the standing orders are written, unless the Prime Minister is being out of order by not addressing the relevance part of the question, it's very difficult for me to make any minister give the answer that you'd like, or give. So, well, I'm trying to deal with the issue, but order. The leader. No, we're just going to deal with this in an orderly way. The Leader of the Opposition, further to the point of order of the manager.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and make reference to your earlier remarks and the remarks you've just repeated again now in relation to the essence of the question being in relation to core inflation, and that if the Prime Minister makes some reference, even historic, to core inflation, that would mean that he was in order. But the essence of this question is about whether the Prime Minister can confirm that core inflation went up today. And the operative part, the most important part of the question is, did core inflation go up today? The Prime Minister is not being relevant to that element, and I think that is the question that is before you. And if core inflation went up today, which is bad for consumers, that is the question we're asking, and that is the part that we believe the Prime Minister is not being relevant to.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister was referring to figures today. And you know, when it's a tight question, it's very difficult. The Treasurer. So to assist the House and to get through question time, I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to be directly relevant. Otherwise, we'll have to move to other questions.
By talking about where core inflation was today and comparing it with what we inherited. That's right. I went straight to the question of core inflation when I asked the question. The fact is that monthly inflation is around a third of what we inherited at the election and around a quarter of its peak. The last quarterly figures, showed that we are getting things done in the right direction, and we're doing that by producing 2 budget surpluses in a row, by having responsible economic management.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, on point of order.
Order, Mr Speaker. It goes to the order of the House. Just then the Treasurer, after being warned in question time today, was called out by you, was not asked to leave. In fact, no ministers have been asked to leave, I don't believe, in your term of speakership, whereas the member for Deakin and other members on our side are frequently asked to leave without warnings, and I ask you respectfully to consider that, highlighted by this example of the Treasurer, in your ongoing deliberations.
I order the Minister for Agriculture Minister and the member for Riverina. Look, I appreciate the feedback from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. It is difficult to maintain order in the House when there is continual interjections, and I would like to think when I do issue warnings that people understand that there is consequences for those actions, as I've done. The Deputy would also like to check about the ministers I have removed from the House during debates and question time. And at the conclusion of question time, I think 2 ministers were removed, the Minister for Regional Development and the Attorney-General. So just want to make sure I put things on the record. Order correctly. Order. But Order. As I said, I appreciate the feedback, and it's always good by the Deputy Leader to highlight that we shouldn't be interjecting during question time, and particularly I'll take that on board. We'll give the call to the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government investing in infrastructure to get more houses built more quickly? How has this approach been received, and are there any risks to this approach?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the excellent member for Hunter for that question. We know that there are many Australians who are wanting to get access to rental properties, and they are wanting to own their own homes. It is why this government has been so focused on cost of living and getting new homes built right now. We are increasing the supply of homes and have an ambitious goal of 1.2 million houses. We're incentivising states and territories to build more homes through the New Homes Bonus, and of course today this parliament has passed the Help to Buy legislation. I want to give credit to the Housing Minister and her predecessor for the great work on that. I know there is a lot more to do. But we are also using infrastructure to unlock and streamline approvals for new homes. We are investing over $1.5 billion over the next 2 years alone to build the infrastructure to bring those houses to market. And I'm pleased to report that the Housing Support Program has been very well received by communities around Australia, with funding already being delivered to support new housing. The Wollondilly Shire Council Mayor said of their housing support program funding, with Wollondilly already the fastest in the Greater Sydney area for DA approvals, this will make our processes even faster and more accurate. Campbelltown City Council representatives said of their funding will provide development confidence and enable councils to revise development standards and including land use density and building height. In Tasmania's Central Coast, the Mayor there has said what is unique about this funding is to actually apply for funding to help us do some of the planning work. Often programs are only about delivery and they're only about hard infrastructure, and councils do struggle to come up with the money that it takes to actually do the planning work and the long-term visionary work that actually helps deliver homes. The Shire of Victoria Plains President said of their housing support program, this vital funding will help bridge a long-standing gap in regional planning capacity, enabling progress on priority housing projects. And even the member for Parkes celebrated the housing support program funding action in Dubbo, saying that the funding will help council ensure that there is an adequate supply of housing to meet future demand. We know that this funding is critical to delivering to local government to actually make sure they can deliver the homes, particularly in our regions. Unfortunately, all of that is at risk if the Leader of the Opposition gets his way. In the middle of a long housing crisis, the Leader of the Opposition has committed to cutting $19 billion from housing and has a plan to force councils to raise rates through concessional loans to pay for infrastructure. That will get passed on to every single resident, from the regions to the cities to our suburbs.
Order. I'd like to hear from the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. 6.5 weeks ago, you announced that the government was committed to legislating a total ban on the use of predictive genetic tests when Australians are attempting to access life insurance products. Despite this promise, genetic discrimination legislation has not been introduced. Assistant Treasurer, when will the genetic discrimination legislation be introduced, and what is causing the delay?
Call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
Thanks, Speaker. And can I thank the member for North Sydney for her question and acknowledge her genuine and long-standing interest in this issue, particularly before coming into Parliament, her role as the CEO of the McGrath Foundation, and acknowledge your deep interest in ensuring we can put in place preventative measures to ensure that people with a predisposition to cancers and other preventable diseases have access to the best preventative medicines and procedures. The government is committed to introducing legislation into Parliament to remove the existing provisions which would allow life insurers to lawfully discriminate against people who have had access to genetic testing and require them to provide that genetic testing material as a condition of taking out life insurance. It's an important issue. We want to ensure that we want to encourage Australians to have access to genetic testing. And can I take the opportunity to congratulate the Minister for Health for his great work in this area. The government has invested close to $1 billion into research in this area. We want to ensure that Australians have access to all of the genetic testing advantages that would enable them to take control of those predispositions in their life. I also want to pay credit, while I'm at it, to great work of many members in this House for advocating on this issue. The people behind me, the member for McNamara, the member for Boothby, the member for MacArthur and so many others. I see on the crossbench the member for Indi, the member for Kooyong, who have taken made very strong representations on this issue. And of course, while I'm at it, I want to pay great tribute to the work of Dr. Jane Tiller from Monash University. There wouldn't be a member in this place who hasn't had representations from Dr. Jane Tiller. We are, as I said, committed to introducing legislation into the Parliament in this term. There's only a day left in this year. It won't happen this year. But I can confirm to the member for North Sydney that work is underway on this issue. And I've also had productive discussions with the Council of Australian Life Insurers, who have committed to ensuring that prior to legislation coming before this House, that they will voluntarily introduce a ban to ensure that this material is not used in the way that we are all concerned about. It is important that all Australians have access to these preventative tests and are able to take control of their own health circumstances. We want to ensure that we expand the research into genomic testing, and we're doing that. We want to ensure that the barriers to people accessing those are removed. The removal of the existing provisions in the disability.
Minister's time. The minister's time has completed. Order. 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 And the House comes to order. We shall hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. After a decade of cuts and neglect, how is the Albanese Labor government strengthening Medicare through urgent care clinics? What threats are there to Medicare and bulk billing?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Hasluck. I think last week I told the House there were 78 urgent care clinics open. Well, in just a week I can inform it's now 82 as of today. We promised 50, there are 82. And last Friday the member for Hasluck and I visited the Midlands Urgent Care Clinic, and we were joined by a hard-working local nurse, Trish Cook, who happened to have worked at that local GP practice earlier. I'd met Trish earlier this year at a Melanoma Institute conference when she was presenting her nursing research into the benefits for patients of receiving chemotherapy at home rather than at a clinic or at a hospital. Terrific research, and I know that Trish will now do fantastic work as the local Labor candidate for the new Bullwinkle electorate in Western Australia. The Midlands Urgent Care Clinic, Mr Speaker, has been delivering high-quality urgent care already for 10,000 local members of the community. And the Google reviews are terrific and far too long for me to read out. But across the country, these clinics are making a real difference to hundreds of thousands of Australians who need free urgent care. And we know also they're relieving real pressure on hospital emergency departments. Now, we know, Mr Speaker, there is more to do for us to keep doing to strengthen Medicare, but we also know that all of that progress on bulk billing, on free urgent care, is under threat at the next election, under threat from a shadow treasurer who continues to describe our investments in Medicare as wasteful spending and who we know will close the urgent care clinics, under threat from a Liberal party who, according to the Deputy Liberal leader, has a philosophy that says that Australians don't value services unless they pay for them. They don't value free hospitals, they don't value bulk bill GP visits or free urgent care, apparently. But of course, under threat from a leader of the opposition, who as Health Minister put the Deputy Liberal leader's philosophy into stark practice, trying to make every single Australian pay a fee every time they went to a doctor, trying to make them pay every time they visited the local hospital emergency department and so much else besides, Mr Speaker. Now, I haven't been able to find any Google reviews of this man's time as Health Minister. I'm not sure Google reviews existed at the time, but I have found a poll, Mr Speaker, with a photo of the Health Minister then, looking much younger and a little bit slimmer, as we all did 10 years ago, looking very, very good. Good memories, good memories. But it says that Peter Dutton was ranked as the worst Health Minister in 35 years.
Invite the Minister not to reflect on members and not to use props as well.
Yes. I'm just reading from this document that says Australian Doctor magazine ranked him the worst Health Minister in 35 years of Medicare, just proving you can't trust the Liberal Party with our health system.
Hear from the Prime Minister.
I ask further questions placed in the notice paper.
We'll go to papers and I give the call to the Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.